Advancing the cause of liberty takes more than just coming up with ideas. It means making them happen. This is Society and the State. Life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 126. It's time to put your thinking caps on. We're going to talk a little bit about what does the future look like, and specifically in a world of artificial intelligence. We're joined by one of the premier AI gurus of the day, Ben Taylor. He's the co-founder of a company called Ziff, and a prolific writer and prognosticator on all things AI. Ben, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Connor. Thanks, Brian.
So maybe let's start kind of very briefly. What is it that Ziff does? Tell us a little bit about what you do to kind of set the stage for our listeners as to, your credibility in talking about the things that we'll then dive into later. What are you guys doing at Ziff, and what's your experience been with AI?
Okay. So maybe I'll start just briefly with my background. So I studied chemical engineering. I went and got a job at Intel and Micron, and I did that for 5 years. And that's kind of maybe a normal thing that a chemical engineer would go and do. And then I went and worked for a hedge fund trading stock on the news. And I joined a company called HireVue 4 years ago and built out interview prediction for them. So we build AI models to predict who was going to be hired or not, which was a pretty fun project to work on. So for Ziff, we started Ziff to really focus on what we call unstructured data. So that's image, audio, and video. These are data sets that have been problematic for AI and for computers to comprehend. But since the year 2014, we've had some new inventions in the AI space that have made this dramatically easier, much easier than it's been in the past.
So tell us, maybe give us a little peek into one project at Ziff. I understand you guys have a variety of clients and projects, some of which are, top secret or whatever. But what's kind of a public project that you can talk about to give a little snapshot as to how you are using AI for yourselves or your clients?
Yeah. So one of our customers is Chatbooks, and so they use AI to predict which photos are likely to end up in a scrapbooking album. So if you give me a photo, it's going to predict the likelihood that this photo is a good family photo. So things like screenshots, a lot of people take screenshots on their phones, screenshots of Google Maps, stuff like that. It's quite easy for the AI to figure out that is not useful. That's not going to end up in a scrapbook, where a picture of a sleeping baby or something, a good picture of a family photo is more likely to be predicted. But to take a little step further, the AI is also figuring out which photos are similar. So it's doing some grouping, some aggregation. The fun thing about the space that we're in is we're pretty broad. So we hit applications across lots of different industries, from advertising to manufacturing to insurance or appraisals, like residential property appraisals is one that we're having a lot of fun with right now.
And are you guys then more of kind of a consulting role for other companies that have kind of unique AI needs? Is that kind of a fair way to explain Ziff, or did I miss the mark?
No, yes and no. So we are an AI platform. So we have built out an API product, which means you can interact with it through code. We don't have a fancy user interface or a dashboard that people can use, but if they know the problems they want to solve, they can solve them on their own. But when we engage with new clients, there definitely is kind of a professional service play while we educate them and update them on how they might think about problems with an AI lens, and we work together to get them to value. So initially, when we engage at the beginning, we are hands-on.
So let's get into kind of the fun stuff here. You've kind of got a behind-the-scenes view, not only with your own clients, but I know you're very tapped into the industry and to emerging technologies and trends and all things AI. So now for what the listener probably really cares about is understanding, or at least trying to understand, what the future might look like. Let's maybe start with one of the things that's most talked about is jobs, the future of work. Of course, with the fight for 15, right, the minimum wage increase, you have all these companies saying, well, forget that. We're going to we're going to purchase these, these screens where customers can do their own ordering, totally customized, not have to deal with another human, and they get precisely what they order. Now, that's not so much AI. That's just, technology, for example, or automation. But are you seeing the same trends? And if you kind of fast forward 5 or 10 years, what does the future of work look like? Are we going to have a lot more, robots and automated processes and so forth that's going to remove a lot of the human jobs that we have now? What does the future of work look like in an increasingly AI world?
Yeah, so this is something that we talk about a lot. And the interesting thing about this, even though this is new technology, we've seen things like this happen in the past. So you had the Industrial Revolution, where you had textile workers and horse and buggy workers that were impacted. A lot of people made money, people lost their jobs. And then you had the revolutions that came from the computer. So you had the Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, these billionaires, and dramatic impact on society and jobs lost as well. And then you had the internet and mobile, and we're going to see the same thing with AI. We're already seeing it. The major concern that is out there is this revolution will be the largest. Humans have never seen something that will be this dramatic. And Mark Cuban has the quote where he thinks that AI will usher in the world's first trillionaire. So we actually don't have a trillionaire on Earth. We have people with hundreds of billions in wealth. But with AI, you could have a trillionaire, suggesting a $10 trillion market cap company. When it comes to jobs and layoffs, the estimates right now are 7% of the current workforce will be replaced in the next 10 years. And so I'd like to emphasize that's replaced within the current role. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't mean they won't be working in a new job family that we haven't even considered yet. But for the role that they do today, those, and to be more specific, self-driving cars, once those come online, you'll have 3 million professional drivers in the U.S. that will be replaced potentially. And then you have the Uber drivers, the taxi drivers. But there's other jobs that we see that we are surprised by. So we're kind of out there in the business environment looking for these types of opportunities. And our favorite question we like to ask a business executive is, where are you constrained by human growth capital? So where are you hurting to hire more people to grow your business? And when we have those conversations, we can often find opportunities for automation.
Ben, I'd like to hear the positive, the upside of AI, but it seems like the human psyche really likes to dwell on the dark side too. I mean, 1984, the movie The Terminator came out, and what was the cause of the rise of the machines? It was they became self-aware, and so there's always been kind of a fear factor exploiting. Well, what if they become intelligent? Wasn't it just a couple of years ago that Google was working with some AI systems that actually started to invent its own language, and they had to shut it down? Do we need to be worried, or are those fears overblown?
Those fears are a little overblown so what you're hitting on is kind of the suggestion of general AI or a singularity, where the AI, you have a runaway event where it is a new entity, it's a new alien created by us. The media, I just like the way the media often handles some of these AI stories where they'll play if they can play the FUD card to create fear, uncertainty, and I always forget the D. You can help me out, Connor, with doubt. Yeah. So FUD. So if they can play FUD with AI, they'll do that all day. So the AI creating its own language, that was definitely a good FUD story that they pushed out, but the AI experts rolled their eyes that there's nothing really important going on with that example. But AI is actually we do have a potential future that is very dark, even outside of the science fiction. So what feels like science fiction now is general AI, where you have this intelligent, strategic AI that is making these plans and kind of working into the internet with these webs, figuring out ways to expand itself. But there is a possibility with narrow AI applications within warfare, autonomous warfare, where it does become very concerning. So if you imagine, hopefully some of the listeners have heard of Boston Dynamics.
That's exactly what I was thinking of as you were describing it.
So if they haven't, please go and YouTube Boston Dynamic robots. And if you haven't seen it yet, you'll be floored, because you have a droid doing a backflip and doing parkour where it's jumping around. And what you're going to have, it's starting to happen now, where there's a lot of government military interest, not just within the U.S., but within countries like Israel, China, and Russia, where they're really interested in creating autonomous warfare, whether there are drones in the sky that are automatically analyzing all the data on the ground and making strategic decisions, or they're droids on the ground that can go and walk through a building. I wouldn't rule out the possibility of human extinction happening from a relatively dumb AI. So this would be search and destroy. It's not strategic. It's not really that intelligent outside of, kind of a short-term opportunity, but it's unbelievably effective when it comes to just search and destroy, when it comes to the war element.
Now, Ben, in saying that, right, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of potential in which way this can go. And so what is it that would restrain that, dumb AI search and destroy from happening? Is it just, you have some evil mad genius and he can take the open source AI code and, tweak it and suddenly create, like, is it just not having an evil, sadomasochistic, type of human, and so if we just have some evil genius, he can create it, and then we're all screwed. Well, what is it that prevents the dangerous AI problems from happening? Is there any way to kind of put handcuffs on it, or to have good AI developers kind of, having their AI out there to watch for bad AI? What is it that kind of prevents that kind of dystopian AI future?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to like lone wolf terrorism, so a single bad agent doing something like a autonomous drone that will go and kill a target or kill people, I don't think there's anything we can really do today to prevent that. And I think the tools are available today if someone's motivated to do that. I'm actually surprised we haven't seen more of that. I know there have been consumer drones used in combat in the Middle East, but they're very crude. They're dropping a grenade where it's still flown by a human. But we do have examples of autonomous drones that can go and deliver an explosive charge. But that's not really the big, overwhelming, scary search and destroy effort that I think that we're hinting on. That will come at the government level. So that will literally come behind the efforts of these multi-billion-dollar contracts that countries like the U.S. and China are pushing. And the major concern is whether or not these governments start posturing like they did during the Cold War, where, hey, look what we just detonated, or hey, look what our droid can do. If that starts happening, then I think that's the only way. The good news, Connor, is for some of the scariest technologies that could be coming, they require a massive amount of capital investment. So you're talking billions of dollars to really get these to prime time, and that will have to come from governments.
Which presumably means that there will be lead time to understand that it's happening, let alone try and stop it, right? Like there will be an awareness that these things, that we're driving toward that destination as a public policy. Probably a lot of it will be, off books, black ops kind of secret R&D. But what I hear you saying, Ben, is that this project would be so large that there's really and tell me if I'm misinterpreting, but my takeaway is that It's not going to be a secret that suddenly the government has developed this massive, bad AI.
No, you're right. So you'll see hints of it. So you'll see hints of these different technologies scaling up, but there will always be multi-year kind of behind the scenes lead time that the public is not exposed to with these top secret war contracts, where different companies are bidding on new capabilities that will be top secret, and the public probably won't be aware until they actually see them demonstrated out in the field.
Ben, what are some of the unexpected places people will be seeing AI start to crop up? You had mentioned self-driving cars, and I think a lot of people are looking forward to that, but are there other areas that they might not immediately associate with AI where nonetheless it could make a world of difference?
Yeah. So anytime you're reviewing image, audio, or video content and you're trying to make a decision from that, that's an opportunity. Or if you're trying to search through that content, right now that's very hard for humans to do. But with AI, you can search just like you would search anything. So people have seen Google Photos. You can search with a photo, but you can do that with audio and video segments potentially. I think where people are going to see a lot more AI, they'll be with your home security system. So I have a Ring security system, and I kind of hate it because I get so many false positives where it's going off all the time and they're not actionable. But I think what you're going to see very soon, we're actually working on some examples today, but during the next couple of years, you'll get to the point where all of your security footage is actionable. So a moth landing on your sensor at night won't do anything, and your kids playing in the driveway won't do anything. But, a 17-year-old male coming into the driveway at night will definitely do something. So for some applications, we think of AI as being kind of an intelligent router where it's making decisions about, is this information important enough to escalate? So I think you're going to go from where we have a few security cameras where every home on the block might have 10 cameras, 5 inside, 5 outside, where today that would not really be practical. You'd be overwhelmed by the activity, but with AI, that will become that'll become a very useful application.
So Ben, let me ask you a question here, because as I think about how AI learns, in the case that you talk about with, image processing or video processing, in order to understand what is or is not a false positive, how the AI learns, as I understand it, by reviewing a massive data set of examples, like, hey, this was a bad thing, hey, this was an okay thing, so ignore this, and over time it learns. So basically, to have this AI future, which I think we've established can have some very negative outcomes, but also some tremendously positive outcomes, which we've barely scratched the surface. In fact, I'd love to touch on healthcare in a minute before we wrap up. But isn't AI predicated on mass surveillance or mass, whether it's nefarious surveillance or just, everybody's being watched all the time? Can we really have this AI future without exposing ourselves and providing AI coders, the governments who hire them, et cetera, with all sorts of images and video about us, about our environment, about our homes? Do you worry about that? Am I wrong to kind of connect the two? What are your thoughts there?
So there are some applications where you could learn on the edge, where it is your home actually has what we call the compute resources within the home to do all the learning. So you wouldn't have to risk having humans review footage from inside your home to make decisions. You could just interact with the home by giving it feedbacks, telling it what false positives are. But at the same time, one of the things people start to realize with AI, when it does come to having your data analyzed without your knowledge, AI can extract a lot more information from that content than we thought previously. So I think the thing where it'll be more invasive will be if you're walking through a shopping mall. So here at my home, I can imagine a scenario where I could actually contain that data and teach it myself. Mm-hmm. But if I'm walking through a shopping mall and you want to have some security opportunity where you can detect a shooter or something and have the police respond faster, that system could very naturally be used for marketing, where you're looking at demographics coming through the mall and maybe potentially, depending on how the ethics of the company running the system, you could even look people up. Like you could say, oh, this is Ben Taylor, this is his Facebook. Now I have his public data, and now I'm going to send him some marketing material. So I think there's a real slippery slope when it comes to security for the state and for the city, but also for targeted marketing. And China's already kind of being a bad player when it comes to security. So if you want to kind of look at what a very bad AI future could be with security and privacy invasion, look at what China's doing right now.
What's an example for listeners who aren't going to go look themselves?
So they have their facial recognition networks that they have in production. So just cameras on the street are really sophisticated. So you walking through a city in China, you being pulled out of a crowd and reviewed in a human queue is a real possibility. The darkest application they have in China is they actually have a social good, like a social index score, where they're literally predicting your value to the state based on everything you're doing. So the friends that you interact with, what you're saying on social, and this will impact your ability to book a plane ticket, a train ticket, and to get different types of loans if you're trying to finance something. And so it's really designed to bankrupt those individuals and isolate them that don't support the current government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll link to that, by the way. That story, I think, is very revealing, because then you get into gamification where you're being rewarded for certain activity, punished, as you point out, for other activity. And so the government is able to use psychological principles underlying gamification to encourage the type of citizenry that they want, that is, in their case, perhaps most docile, submissive, not rebellious in any way, and so forth. So we'll link to that today at the show notes page, societyandthestate.com/126. Ben, before we wrap things up, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about healthcare. What are some of the emerging AI possibilities that could come to this very stagnated, we have a lot of these cool devices and stuff, but when you really think about it, there's so many other opportunities in the healthcare system. I feel that our regulatory system is really impeding. Maybe in other countries are we seeing other, AI possibilities with healthcare? What is the future of healthcare with AI going to look like in your view?
Yeah. So with this big breakthrough that we had in AI a couple of years ago, it's called deep learning. And as soon as this breakthrough happened, everyone started coming up with all of these new verticals that would be dramatically disrupted. And medicine was one of them, where people were saying years ago that your radiologist, your pathologist, your dermatologist, these experts that we've relied on to diagnose disease will be replaced or augmented very soon. And we're seeing that now on the research side. So you can go look up white papers where radiologists and dermatologists are being beaten at certain types of diagnoses, where they're looking at an image of a rash or an image of an x-ray, and they're trying to decide what the diagnosis is compared to a panel of experts. We're seeing that AI can do is actually showing signs that it can do that better than a physician. I think the thing that will impact more people will be AI coming into the home. Unfortunately, in the U.S., we have restrictions around HIPAA. It's really hard for a small company like us to get access to some of these data sets to show what can be done with AI, or for us to launch an app on the iPhone where you can just take a picture of your child's rash or record a cough and use AI to predict, a stack rank of potential diagnoses. That's not something that we can practically do in the U.S. today, but it's easier for us to get traction in other countries like China, Mexico, Nepal, even in Europe, where the restrictions they're not as strict when it comes to protecting healthcare data. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the missing key to have some of the big breakthroughs. But I'm really excited because I actually studied medicine. I took the MCAT, and so I've grown up with this idea that doctors are to be respected because they have a lot of tribal knowledge. If you've been a physician for 20 years, of course I'd want to take my kid to come visit you because the chance of you catching a difficult diagnosis or a rare disease is more likely. But I'm to the point now that if I took my kid to the physician and there wasn't an AI component with a CT scan or anything that went out digitally, I would be quite frustrated.
And I'm sure when you ask the doctor about AI, they scratch their head and wonder what you're talking about. This is the new version of people coming in with like a WebMD print off from the internet and thinking that they know more than their doctor. So it's an exciting trend. But I mean, you look at driverless cars, right? I mean, here you have the public freaking out when, a Tesla gets into an accident or something like that, disproportionately to the people who are dying on the roads all day long from human failure. And so if you look at even a 50%, let alone an 80, 90, 99% decrease in vehicle fatalities by putting more into AI and technology than into, human failure, whether it's healthcare or whatever industry, that seems like a massive win, a huge opportunity, but one, as we've discussed, that is not without its, potential downsides if that technology is abused. Any final thoughts, Ben?
Yeah. So one final thought. I was just thinking of a funny idea related to healthcare. This might seem like science fiction, but it's actually more realistic than people think. In the future, if you allowed something like this to happen, where you would visualize the plate of food that you're about to eat, you might be able to look at your life expectancy go up and down in the corner of your Google Glass before you take a bite of that Big Mac. So then the joke is, well, I'll just end up eating kale. That'll be the only thing we'll eat because we'll see that our life expectancy is maximized, but we'll hate what we eat. So like it sounds really silly, but the data's pretty much there. If you had everyone submitting live, really what they're eating in real time and collecting all that data after a couple decades, you would almost have that insight that, man, you're drinking a lot of Coke, and we know what happens when you do that. You get diabetes, and here's your risk profile. And
the worst part is when government comes into that and says, well, because you're going to be on the public dole and the taxpayers are going to have to fund your emergency room visits and so on and so forth, then we're going to start penalizing you on the front end using this AI to try and minimize the public treasury expenses on the back end. And I think that's where the real problem comes in. It's not just kind of life empowerment helping you be a better you. It's hey, it's in the taxpayer or the public's interest to make sure that you're not consuming too much of this or doing too much of that. So kind of a crazy world ahead of us. Ben, thanks for giving us a little peek into it. Ben Taylor is co-founder of Ziff. We will link to his website, the Boston Dynamics video, and the story about the Chinese system that we mentioned on today's show notes page, which is societyandthestate.com/126. Ben, thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, happy to do. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.